I'll pass you over to Hannah now, who's going to introduce you to the speakers. I can stop talking for a moment.
Yeah, so I want to say thanks to Bryony, first off, for that really wonderful curators-led tour and kind of talk through all of the workshops that have been going on here. She's really been really brilliant at kind of coordinating everything down here. So thanks for all joining us. This is the 9th in our series of kind of online artist talks that we've been running since the Sustainable Darkroom residencies back in kind of the beginning of April. We're really delighted to have 3 artists with us today who all we feel kind of address landscape in different ways, but with a very kind of nurturing approach and very much kind of look after the land as well as representing the land and working with the land which surrounds them. So I won't take up too much more time because I think we've got some really interesting talks to come. So I'll just introduce everyone. So first off, we're going to hear from Nettie Edwards. Nettie is a recognised authority in the anthotype process. Her work is practice-led and site-specific. She was named as a contemporary experimental photography reference in the 2019 A-level art and design paper for Pearson Edexcel and recently run the 100 Heroines experimental open call. She is committed to making work that is sustainable and regards the landscape and gardens she works in as her creative collaborators. Next, we'll hear from Matt Slater. Matt is currently living and working in Cape Town, South Africa. He's interested in our relationship to nature and exploring themes of impermanence, transience, mortality, and the materiality of the photographic medium. Through his exploration of craft, Matt has deconstructed both the image and process to create a visual language that uniquely blends archaic process and current technology. And then lastly, we'll hear from Amina, who wonderfully ran one of our first workshops, the digital zine, which you all just got a great preview of. Amina is a London-based photographer. She tells stories about adventure, the outdoors, our relationship with the natural world. And she also runs Of the Land and Us, which is a great online photographic journal, which I really recommend you go and check out. The digital zine is also available to view on there. She also writes a bi-weekly newsletter called Notes on Freelancing, which is all about freelance life. So with that, I think I'll hand straight over to Nettie.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you. Well, I can't see you, but I hope you can see me. It's great to be here today and to be part of this wonderful event. Congratulations to everybody involved in organising it. It looks fantastic. So without further ado, I'm going to start talking about my work. This event has actually helped me to... Sorry, I've just had to turn this round so that I can do a slideshow. To evaluate my work for the last 20 years, actually, since I moved over from working in the theatre to becoming a freelance artist, and realising that actually the landscape's always been there. And even though my work's very different when I began, it all connects. So I'm going to talk a tiny little bit about that early work because it informs my later practice. So I'm going to try and do the screen sharing thing, everybody. So stick with me. So I'm talking about landscapes as collaborators, which is something I feel very passionately about. And I'm going to try and explain what I mean by that. And I'm going to start. This is Lower Hutt in New Zealand from the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. And I'm talking about sensing space here, how we sense space. And I want to begin with a quote from a gentleman called John Purser, who was born and grew up in the village of Ilmington in South Warwickshire in the late 19th century. And in the early part of the 20th century, he and quite a few other agricultural labourers from that village, including members of my family, decided to take the risk and to emigrate to New Zealand to find a better life because things were very hard there. Many years later, in 1958, he wrote down his reminiscences And this is a quote, something that he wrote. I've actually written on the screen everything that I'm going to say to help people who are hard of hearing and also to help me remember what to say. One of the greatest sights was a field of wheat being cut. The farmer would take on as many families as he could, and it was beautiful to see them stretched out across a 20-acre field, each taking their allotted acre or two as their part in getting the harvest gathered. It took several weeks, working from 6 in the morning until 7. It was a weary tramp home at night, but there was a feeling of happiness as the families called to one another across the widening distance. And I love that, and it's stuck with me ever since I wrote my dissertation for my degree, which I think was about 40 years ago. And my degree was about the folk customs of Ilmington because my family were involved in the revival of the folk traditions in that village. And what came out of that was the way that we can't look at folk customs in isolation. We have to look at the landscape that they're created in and how the people who create work on the landscape, how the folk customs evolved from that relationship with the landscape. I had an opportunity to think more about this when in 2000 I did my first ever creative residency at the Gloucester Folk Museum, where I decided to spend time looking into my gypsy ancestry. And I got to know over the next 2 years the local community of travellers. I worked with them, collecting their stories, archiving them, documenting their lives and their old photographs and taking photographs of their contemporary lives. And I'm going to share with you 2 very short digital stories that I made with 2 friends. I made a whole set of digital stories which can be found online. I made them for the Rural Media Company in Herefordshire. And I've got 2 viewpoints here of the land from 2 traveller friends. Oh dear, hold on guys, something's gone wrong. Okay.
Whatever farm we work for every year, we'd book up to. Whatever farm we work for every year, we'd book up to see when we.
Can anybody hear my sound?
Yeah, we can hear your sound, the music that comes
Oh,
up.
sorry guys, that was really depressing. I'll go back, okay? Sorry. Okay.
Whatever farm we work for every year, we'd book up to see when we could pull in and that. And the farmer would tell us, and then we'd take the time to travel up. It'd take about a fortnight to travel with the horses. They'd like staying here and giving the horses a rest and all like that. And then we'll pull in about a week before they started, you know, to give us time to settle and do. Just get the camp ready and that until the work started.
Can you dinna like it last winter in the town? And the scullies I miscry us, and they try to bring us down. And it's hard to raise 3 pounds in a single flea box room. So I'll take yous on the road again when yellow's on the broom.
Put the harness away and things like that. We used to go to the shop and I would add harness the horse up to go to the shop. We used to mostly tidy everything up and get our washing all done, you know. You wouldn't have much time when you come out of the fields to do it and all that.
The scullies call us dirty tinks and sconce our burns in school. Who cares what a scully thinks, for a scully's just a fool. And he's now heard the owlin' song or seen the flax in bloom. Why they're gay coots up in houses when yellow's on the broom. When yellow's on the broom.
There'd be rows of fires outside and everybody'd be round the fire and the women would be cooking on their fires and that. Young girls and boys, when they were single, used to sit all around the fire and talk till 1 or 2 o'clock sometimes, talking, telling stories to one another and that. now we're on a site that everybody's in all in their own places, and you never hardly see, you just see them passing by and have a chat now and again, but it wasn't like it was when you had wagons and tents.
I'm weary for the springtime when we tax the road once more, till the plantains and the purlins and the berry fields are blurred, and we meet up, we are kinfolk, free all the country road, when the gang of good folk tack the road, when yellow's on the broom, when yellow's on.
You know, like when it's coming on summertime and you've had the winter and coming into summertime to spring and that, you want to go then, you just feels bored and you want to go, you know, to travel and that.
When the gang of folk tack the road, when yellow's on the broom.
They called it itchy feet, don't they?
So I've no idea if everybody can hear me. I hope so, because I couldn't hear that sound. So that was Sylvia's story.
We could hear all of that, don't worry.
Fantastic. Sorry about that problem at the beginning. So that was Sylvia's story about life on and off the road and how the travellers worked the land. And I remember John Purser's words, that beautiful description of how we connect to the land with our bodies, with all our senses, that beautiful image of the sound travelling across the landscape as the families split up. The travellers talked a lot to me about this, about the way that they felt the land inside their bodies as they worked it. And now I'm going to have, there's another little video that I'm going to play for you now, a much shorter one, by my friend Marie, who shares her experience.
There is no anger in this wood, is there? There's only beauty in here. And this is what they took our people from. And now our people are rebelling and they got this anger and this hatred. Our souls are dying. Our light is leaving us. And we need to get our light back in our souls. When a baby is born, she is the most purest thing there is. Pure of all sins, pure of all filth and dirt. There ain't no bad thoughts in their brain. Those bad thoughts come from what man puts into them. Now, if you brought a child up in this wood, and this is how our people were, you brought a child up in this wood, and she grew up with that, and that's all she sees. She'll grow up pure and beautiful, or he'll grow up pure and good, and he'll look after and provide for his family. Everything you need that nature provided for you was there. And then they took you and they put you in these concrete houses, and your life changes. You become miserable, you become sad, you become bitter, and you become like everybody else, instead of being the one person that you are. You just need to come here and sit for 5 minutes and realise what you've got. And then you can go back and face the world.
Did everybody hear that? Hello? Okay, right. So Sylvie talked about the way that by making the travellers stop travelling, it changed them psychologically. And it's impossible to get involved with gypsies and travellers without getting involved with the politics. And one of the things that really became very clear to me was this issue of travelling. It's not illegal to travel in this country, but it's illegal to stop. And the issues are about our freedoms. Some of those photographs in that last video were taken in the New Forest on Shave Green, where there were gypsy settlements in the 1920s and before then. And the gypsies were made to live in these enclosures, which now look very beautiful, but at the time they weren't used to living cooped up in small areas with no sanitary amenities. And they soon became very unpleasant. And the gypsies eventually, the families were split up and sent into houses. And an artist called Sven Berlin actually lived amongst the gypsies and befriended them at that time. And he wrote this quote, this image, this is a composite image of some of my images from Marie's video on a huge light box that was 4 foot square. And the quote is, "When freedom is taken away, the flower of life shall wither, and none but those weeping shall be found on the face of the earth." It's about protecting our freedoms. to the landscape and our access to the landscape. And this is something that matters very much to me. So during that time, during that 6 years when I was working with gypsies and travellers, I took time out and I was commissioned to do a number of projects with British Waterways and the public in West Bromwich. And I did a number of walking projects, journeying. And I took journeys across places that I'd chosen on the map and explored them, documented the people I met, collected stories, photographed the minutiae of the journey. If I was doing them today, I'd also do colour collection. And lots of things came out of this for me. It was an industrial landscape in the West Midlands. It's Netherton, Tividale, that area, an area I knew from my childhood. And people were wonderful. People, I knocked on people's doors to get stories. I met them in parks. They let me take their photographs. And what came out of this was our symbiotic relationship with the landscape and how we engage with it in so many different ways. And how do we claim our landscape and how does it claim us? Because it does claim us in very subtle and important ways. And how do we navigate our way through landscapes as they change around us? We inhabit not only seen but unseen landscapes, those that live within us, in our stories, dreams and memories. And these issues came up time and time again, the connection that people had with the unseen landscape that was inside them, and that reflected back out into the landscape. At this point, I didn't consider myself a photographer. I was using my dad's old digital camera. I think it was 1.3 megapixels. They weren't very good technically. I was documenting. I was using them as a documentation tool. And then in 2009, I got my first iPhone and everything changed because I started to use this little computer inside my pocket as a personal diary. I've been suffering for some time from post-traumatic stress disorder. And it was very difficult often to get out of the house. And I set myself a 365-day project. I don't know if you've heard of these. A lot of people who use mobile phones for taking photographs do it. You take a photograph every day and you post it online. And I decided to make mine of a place near where I live called Lot Meadow, which is near my allotment patch, which is an old withy bed meadow. It's on the floodplain. And like many of the fields in the area, it's owned by a developer and is always in danger of development, even though it's on the floodplain. And I went there every day, and over that time, I developed a relationship with it. I was exploring what taking photographs of this place was about for me. I didn't want it to be narrative or documentary or anecdotal because that felt too easy. That felt like what I've been doing before. And very soon it got personal. I was looking in to look out and to look in again. I was creating emotional spaces in response to the landscape, filtered through my mental health. And I started doing macro work. I started looking closely. I started to think about the way that we look out at a landscape and then we look in. So our eyes are constantly scanning the landscape like animals. We're still animals inside. And I'm still working with these images, and I'm asking questions about, do we inhabit landscapes or do they inhabit us? I think both of those statements are correct. Then in 2014, I decided that I'd been reading a little bit about the anthotype process, plant-based printing, and I really wanted to explore this more. And I also wanted to find more reasons to spend time in gardens, because I'd realised that this was an incredibly important thing. If I was going to be well, if I was going to get well, then I needed to spend more time in gardens, because I realised that they were things that gave me the most joy. And so I approached Painswick Rococo Garden and asked them if I could be artist in residence with them for a year to research this process, which at the time, there wasn't much around about it. There was Malin Fabra's beautiful book, and that was it. And I really wanted to find out about it. I was very interested in it as a process because it's ephemeral. And I was afraid of death, and I wanted to confront that. I wanted to work with that. So they said yes, and I started visiting there 2 days a week and making anthotypes. I fell in love with the place. It's a very beautiful garden. And it was an interesting journey. I'm going to talk more about this, obviously. So anthotypes are prints made with emulsions extracted from plant materials such as flowers, leaves, fruit and vegetables. And it's also possible to use herbs, spices, wine, tea and coffee. To make anthotypes, coloured pigments are extracted from plants. Pigments are chemicals with many purposes, and through the process of photosynthesis, light is harvested and converted into energy. Energy leads to growth. And human existence is inextricably bound up into this process. So colours do not exist simply to delight our senses. They're an essential component of life on Earth. This is personal. A little bit about the process. You don't need much. Maybe everybody here knows how to do this, but I'll be very brief. You need some plant matter. You need something to mash it up with to get a pulp. You need something to strain it with. You need something to put the strained pulp into. A pair of old tights will do. Muslin cloth is good. Tea strainer is good. You want to get a nice pulp. I say you make pesto and then you strain it and get all the juicy bits out. And then you coat paper. And depending on the paper that you use, you can get lots of different colours. The papers here have all been coated with beetroot juice, which was one of the first emulsions I used. And as you can see, there's a huge range of colour there. It's to do with the chemical content of the paper. You can have lots of fun with colour by shifting the pH balance of the colour. And some colours do and some colours don't. Greens don't, which makes sense because green has to be very stable because it's the top level. The chlorophyll is the top level for photosynthesis. So it makes sense that green isn't going to shift. So you coat your papers and you place something above the paper, maybe a leaf, maybe a flower, maybe a transparency, not a negative transparency, because this is a bleaching process. You put it in a frame and you leave it out in the sun and you wait and you keep waiting and then you wait a bit more until finally you get a print. Prints. And my process, I wrote down my little intention, my process intention before I started the residency, and it was 4 words and another word: cultivation, experimentation, creation, sharing, and then letting go. Because once you start the process of reaction to light in an anthotype, you can't stop it. In fact, even if you put it in the dark, you won't stop it. So working with nature is a humbling process, and it may be weeks before the sun bleaches the colour from a piece of paper. So you must be patient. And something else, you must be philosophical, because it's not possible to fix anthotypes. If left in the light, they will eventually be consumed by the sun that created them. In fact, they'll still fade, even if they're in darkness. And just to show you what that means in real terms, here are 2 pictures of an anthotype. The one on the left is the one that I made in 2014. It's a sweet pea anthotype. And the picture on the right is what it looks like today. Am I sad about that? Yes, it's quite sad, but I can make another one. So that's okay. And anyway, I'm now working with that impermanence. So I'm finding the images that have faded actually more interesting than the ones when they're fresh out of the box. So here we've got 2 faded anthotypes, and I love them. I think they're really interesting. And because I work a lot with archives, archival documents, archival photographs, these appeal to me. I like the idea of being a forger, of forging evidences. And one of the things that happened when I got to Painswick is that lots of conversations started happening between me and visitors, and it was incredible. People would talk about life, death, spirituality, and we also talked about, well, what's an ephemeral art form? Well, tattooing only exists as long as the body it's printed on is alive and the skin is still there. Music's an ephemeral art. Cooking's an ephemeral art. We spend hours cooking a meal, maybe, and then we eat it very quickly. So why do we worry about making an image that's going to disappear? Lots of interesting things were thrown up, and they all became part of my work. The stories became part of my work, the philosophies that we discussed. We talked about materials. There were some guys there who were reliming the walls of one of the buildings. So we talked about how lime is made and how lime was made historically, and how we try to reproduce that now, and how do we try to reproduce that now. And another thing happened, and that was that I became very aware of the transient nature of the landscape. I know it probably sounds crazy, but I'd always thought, oh, well, landscape, it's solid, it's there, it's permanent. Of course it's not. And I like shadows on a driveway and the ripples on a pond and the clouds in the sky. My anthrotypes are ephemeral. And so I started taking photographs of ephemeral things and printing them as anthrotypes. And our bodies are ephemeral. And I do a lot of work with images of people, which may not seem to be landscapes, but they're made with the landscape, they're of the landscape, and they reference the statement that I've made already, that we have a biological connection with plant processes. It's part of who we are. I also collect and document the colours of the landscape. I do mapping, and I have lots of books now that are full of the colour that I've collected on my journeys. And then one of the shifts, so many things, it wasn't long before I realised that my life was going to change forever. My life had already changed, and there were a number of principles that I wanted to live my life by. Everything changed, and my shift of perspective. I didn't want to travel by plane anymore. Not that I like traveling by planes anyway, but now I just wanted to go by train. And I started to make lots of rail journeys across Europe. Whenever I was going on a residency somewhere, I'd go by train. And traveling became part of my process. And those journeys became as important as what happened when I got to the residency. And the way that I experimented with, it's ongoing, how I see the landscape when I'm passing through it, what time does space, and how I relate to the landscape as I'm passing through it in a train. And at the moment, these images are digital. They're all done with my mobile phone. Everything's processed on my mobile phone. And the next thing to do is I'm going to be processing them as anthrotypes, but also with various plant-based photo chemicals. And the other thing, lots of conversations in my bothy studio at, well, how are you going to sell them? Well, then they're not going to last. What are you going to do? How to make this? And I'm, well, I won't, will I? You know, I'm not going to make any money. But I'm actually more concerned about the world that's disappearing. Don't get so worked up about my anthrotypes disappearing, because you know what? There's a glacier here, and that's gone. It's not there anymore. At least half of it's gone. So I find it very interesting that people get very, very worked up about these pictures that I can reproduce. I can make them again. Disappearing, and they're not thinking that actually the thing that there's a picture of has actually disappeared. It's gone. And so this was a project that I did in 2017 where I took a book called World of Wonders, and I printed pictures from in the book as anthrotypes, and I put them back in the book and laid them out on tables for people to see. And of course, as they were on the tables, they were disappearing. And my next process is actually to print the whole book as an anthrotype, which is going to take some time, but you have to be patient. So I just want to talk about the professional implications of working with anthrotypes and other ephemeral processes. You can't be sure how long prints will take to make. Prints may fade before an exhibition date. That's an interesting challenge I've had to deal with, or you might not have enough time to produce prints for an exhibition if you're invited to be in an exhibition. Funding implications, increased travel and accommodation costs are an implication. I've often lost money on jobs because the fee's only covered, the fee doesn't cover me going by rail or staying overnight. It's longer than going by plane, but I've made the choice, well, you know what, it's more important for me to live by my principles. Consider new models of relationships with our clients. So it opens up the possibility of circular economies, sustainable relationships with clients where images are reworked, and photographs as palimpsests where several things might happen. So somebody might buy an anthrotype from me and it fades, and then they bring it back and I print another one. It's a possibility. Last year, I started taking photographs of the wonderful Mad allotment. I have 2 allotments, and this is one of the allotment gardens that I work on. This isn't my allotment. These are pictures of other allotments, and I love this place. It's just full of human intervention and the way that people have used things to make structures, and it's just delightful. It's sustainability at its best, and there's a lot of sports equipment from old school sports days here, which is fun. And somebody here obviously has a lot of Yakult in their life, because I think that might be water bottles, I'm not sure. I fell in love with this place when I first saw it, and at the time we only had the one allotment plot, but we were looking for a second, and so we put in for one, and we got it. We got this one, and I'm now making anthotypes of these images with the produce that I grow on the allotments. I grow everything I work with. I buy nothing. I work in season. If it rains, it rains. If the sun doesn't shine, that's fine. So everything is grown. So this is ground elder, which is a weed, but we've been eating it over lockdown, and beetroots. So I've talked about wilding my practice. I wouldn't say I was rewilding it, and that because I don't think my practice was that wild before I started working with anthotypes. So you need to embrace impermanence. You need to embrace chance and randomness. In other words, whatever nature gives us. You've got to accept the weather, whatever it throws at you. You've got to embrace failure, slowing down, seasonality. As I've said, I grow all my own materials. Sustainability, repurposing. I never buy anything new. I try to use things that are around me as containers and equipment. And locality. I love travelling. I can't wait to get back on the road, but maybe we should all travel less and regard ourselves as local service providers. A lot of artists do this already, and I've done it. You know, they're providing services to their community. I like the idea of an artist being embedded in the community and providing something to their local community. Quickly, because I know I'm running out of time because of my mess up with the video, this is a project I worked on this summer where I took this idea of repurposing to an extreme, and I used objects from my aunt's possessions. My auntie died, and I cleared the house, and I kept all the junk and rubbish that everybody else would throw away. And this summer I used it to make my anthotypes. And these are all things that grew in my garden. They were a bus ticket, but they did things I used didn't grow in my garden, but the plants did. And also the other thing I did, because I've long thought I wanted to get acetate out of my practice for transparencies. So I started using paper bags from my aunt's collection as things to put on top to print through. And also there were things in bags, like hairnet was in a bag. So I used that to make a chlorophyll print. That worked very well. So I'm hoping eventually not to have any acetate in my practice at all. So just print on paper and use that as a negative or the transparency. And these are some of my final anthotypes. Again, they're made from the land. They're made from the landscape, even though they don't depict it. They are of the land. And one last thing. So landscapes as collaborators to pull it together. It's not all about us. And we're not even the most interesting part of it, in my opinion. Humankind is biologically connected to the landscape, and without photosynthesis, we face extinction. So we must be compassionate collaborators and only take what we really need, or make sure we give back. And our landscapes can't speak for themselves, so we must advocate on their behalves. And I actually think that's the most important thing that we can do right now. Because during this period of lockdown, we've seen HS2 storming through our landscapes and destroying ancient woodlands and trees. And it concerns me that our footpaths are going to be lost. So I think it's important to get involved. Okay, that's the end.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Nettie. That was really wonderful. Like, what's so nice to see is how the landscape has kind of been the one consistent thing throughout your practice, even though it's evolved through kind of different processes and approaches. You can see the kind of continuation of how important the landscape and the people within the landscape are to you, and how you've kind of used that to convey different things. There are a few questions in the chat, but I'll leave them all until the end, and we'll do a kind of Q&A for all the artists at the end there. Now, if we want to hand over to Matt.
Cool. Hey, yeah, first off, hi to Bryony and Hannah, thanks for having me, and to the fellow speakers, Nettie and Amina. Okay, I'm just gonna go straight to the share screen then.
Yep, sounds good.
Cool. Can I take myself off the screen instead? And then just, yeah, okay, I'm gonna stop the video. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'm gonna be talking about my project Autumnal Glimpses. It's a project that I started doing last year and this year. It initially started, or some of the work started when I was doing a residency a couple years back for this place, Amplify Studio in Cape Town. And for that project, I spent about 3 months focusing solely on this this garden, this public garden called the Bosch and Heelville Arboretum. It's just below one of like our famous gardens, Kirstenmarsh Gardens, and I would go there like 2 or 3 times a week in between work and stuff, and photograph the space over the 3 months. So yeah, some of the negatives that I actually used for this project were from that project, as well as things that I noticed. Yeah, because over the 3 months and you're spending enough time, you take the obvious pictures first, and then after like a month or two, you start to really like look at all the very little details. So yeah, during this time, I started to experiment with lumen prints, where you lay the photographic paper down and you let the plant matter expose over time. And it really captures like weather, like all the weather, like whether it rained, they would come out differently if it was like the rainy season. So yeah, I was very fascinated by this. And also that during one of the weeks, someone had set up string across the trees to maybe, I don't know, create a game or something like that. But through a storm, or after a storm, the string had been sculpted by the rain and the wind to wrap around these trees in all these abstract forms. So I was very excited about that and photographed it a ton. And later I actually thought, well, I can actually incorporate this into my work. So yeah, that was the beginning of the project. And here's a piece, sorry. So yeah, this was one of the first sewn works that I did for this body. And yeah, so what I used was one of those negatives from the Arboretum, and I laid it in a tray with some of the water and plant matter that I found from the Arboretum. And it eventually created these abstract things where the water was lying around. And I rescanned that and printed that out onto A4 using my inkjet printer. And yeah, so the reason, well, through my work generally, I use a mixture or hybrid process of darkroom or analog processes, and then the digital side as well. And yeah, so for this, my limit of paper at the time was A4. So I printed these A4 sheets and then creating a like horizontal line there. And when I started toning the works I collected all the plant matter from the location wherever I photographed this from. So this would have been like in the midsection of the Arboretum. So I went and gathered all the oak leaves, and I toned the individual A4 prints with this plant matter or eco printing technique. And yeah, through that process, since the paper gets all soggy and becomes quite quite soft, then it's easily tearable. So whether it's torn by hand or during the process in the kettle, I would then dry them out and sew them up together. I got the sewing idea to mimic the string that I found along the trees, and I thought this was a nice way of including both on an organic form or organic line, remnant of maybe like a snail cruising around, as well as the act of a physical, mechanical, and human interaction of putting the line there, the thread there. So yeah, I wanted to show this one first as it kind of incorporates all three processes and was the starting point for the work. Yeah, so then it starts to get, I didn't really like how much rigid, or that there were so many rigid lines in the work. So I started using tearing techniques as well as the lasso tool in Photoshop to physically choose and cut out. So you kind of start in one space, and then you kind of work your way around spontaneously to kind of fill the gaps. And in this way, I could, when I toned the work, I could individually tone and kind of choose where I wanted certain things to, or have a hand. I wouldn't have total control, because I wanted to actually surrender part of the process to the landscape, to the space that I was photographing. So all the plant mats and stuff contributed to this, and I could have a choice on laying things where and where, but I mean, I wouldn't know exactly how things were going to come out in the end. And I think that is that's an important part of the process. So yeah, with this one, I actually used a negative from a Lomo camera, and I cut out and I spliced out one of the landscape images there and flipped it upside down to make a mirror. And then, yeah, so each of these works, once they are sewn and washed and everything, then are coated with like a type of varnish, which gives it like a tactile feeling, almost like, yeah, like a very thick photograph, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, so number 56. What I try to do a lot of the time is that I'll take inspiration from the photograph and from the space, and try to mimic certain things to kind of just to add to it. So for the bark, I would, in that space of the tree, I would create some kind of like way of illustrating that part of the bark. And this is also the only one that actually shows a piece of the string from the original photographs. Yeah, so it starts to get a little bit more abstract, and I start to use a bit more different materials. Like this one actually used a bit of charcoal and things, just because in the image, some of the plant matter and water had created these abstract markings that reminded me of charcoal drawings. So I just added that in, and there's actually a little silver gelatin print of a flower that I found nearby to that tree as well sewn in there. So I try to create like a collage of the experience of what is in that space, and what is, so not just what is photographed, but what is nearby, and what contributes to the space around it, to its environment. Yeah, so for number 58, this is where you start to see a bit more of the scanning coming into the picture. I've used the lasso tool quite extensively here while tearing, but this, I really like to create layers and build up the layers throughout the photographs. So this initially started with a 6x7 negative that I scanned in, reprinted onto a pigment print, or inkjet print, and then added charcoal that I'd found onto that image, rephotographed that, and when scanning that negative, I added the plant matter or whatever debris I found from the area, and yeah, so like there's a dead wasp, and there's like little odd pieces of rock and stuff, that with the scanning you really get that that depth. And yeah, so then the last step of the process was to actually print this out onto a pigment print, and then go wild with whatever toning materials that I found. And this is actually quite different to the previous ones, where I didn't actually boil or do anything with this. I strained out different parts of the plant matter and applied it in a more like painterly fashion, like stripping or using a paintbrush or other kinds of things to apply it. And yeah, so this one changed quite a lot from its initial, before I added a varnish. But yeah, I feel like this is a good example of the layering. Yeah, and for the final one of this, or no, second to final last one of the sewing prints, this is the last one I'd made, and it's gone completely into almost complete abstraction here, where you can't see the landscape. You can see a tree in the middle ground there, but the main thing that you see is the mimicking, or the remains of what I'd seen of the landscape, with the almost like tree-like form coming out of it there, with a ton of scratches and marks made. Because the important part for me is to actually keep all these things, all the traces from the image making process. For me, that's one of the most beautiful parts, is showing all these examples, all little moments of imperfection and impermanence. Yeah. So this is a bit of a transitional image. This is, like I said, I use kind of a hybrid technique in my process in general. And for these, I'd actually started using a little compact Canon G9 with the flash on it, which I love. It's one of my favorite cameras. And I could just walk around and, take my dog for a walk and just fire off and get these interesting compositions, because you can actually really separate the foreground and the background by using the flash. So yeah, for this one, or for these images, I would go around and kind of blow out the highlights, so that I could use that, and they would be more open to toning. Like you can see, the border of this image is actually plain white, because that's the paper. But the actual branch in the foreground is almost the same tone. And yeah, for these, I would actually, when I'm toning the image, when it's soft and malleable, I can kind of manipulate it in a way to resemble parts of the subject. So like the circular form in the middle, I tried to kind of emulate in the tearing and showcase in the sewing there. Yeah, so these are kind of all they've. When I was making the work, I had the idea of they're quite separate images or in process, but I felt like they work quite well together, having the digital and the analog side. So yeah, these are the ones taken with the little digital camera, all printed at around the same size. And in this one, taken in the Arboretum, you can see that everywhere around the center has been toned relatively equally, except for the middle part, which was kind of resisted by the oak leaves that I found from just below these trees. So you can see almost like the original black and white below there. And the idea for this was to kind of have, because I photographed in two spaces in the Washington Hill Arboretum, as well as the forest, the Newlands Forest in Cape Town. And it was to kind of show the difference between the two in a way, because the Arboretum is, by its nature, a man-made place. In the beginning, certain trees and things were planted specifically for reasons for planting those, and was kind of cultivated in a certain way. So all the there's no images from the forest which are sewn or manipulated in a hand way. But yeah, so yeah, this is another one from the Arboretum. And the idea to have all similar sizes was to actually have to have kind of exhibition prints with the larger ones, and then to have an accompanying book with these smaller toned prints, so that it would be kind of like two separate things, but it would work together as a whole and be cohesive. So yeah, this is an example of one of the images that I took in Newton's Forest. And the interesting thing for me here is that the color tone changes from like a dark brown or to a more like lighter orangey, yellowish. And this is because of the different material used. And although not featured here, but in the forest, there are a ton of pine trees. And in the late 1800s in Cape Town, or in the Newlands Forest, most of the natural trees were felled for commercial pine plantations. And although there's a lot was felled and a lot of the natural trees grew back or were specifically planted there, there's still a lot of pine trees there in pockets. And yeah, there's a ton of pine needles. So even though I do incorporate some leaves from this tree and some plant debris, you're still going to get a bunch of pine needles. And I thought it is interesting to kind of showcase that there is a lot of, even though what is pictured here is something else, there are a lot of things surrounding it which have an impact on how this tree grows and what's in its environment. I also wanted to show that that when you blow out the highlights here and you kind of are reducing the information in an image, you're kind of increasing the dimensions of it in a way. It seems, or at least for me, that there's a greater separation of the foreground and the background, and creates kind of these almost three-dimensional images when I look at them, and really helps the trees and the natural forms pop out. So yeah, this you can see in 101 here that there are certain different colors and things. So like around this tree, there were some flowers that I added in, and I feel like it's important, or what I'm drawn to is, especially what I tried to showcase in this project, was the impermanence of everything and nature and all these transitional states that it goes through, especially autumn, or the season of autumn, which I think is a great example of this stage. And yeah, like this is a fallen tree that has this, I found, a beautiful form, even though it's dead and now it's onto its next stage of decay and going back into the earth. Yeah, so this is also another one from the Newlands Forest. Kind of goes down into, for me, it draws me in directly into the middle there. And I found that the forest always has a very interesting, it's this beautiful space and serene, but also like kind of dark and kind of scary at times too, where it depends on kind of what time you're visiting it or how you're visiting it or something. But it's one of those things where it's full of possibilities, and kind of like, for me, the ocean, whereas it's a very interesting or spiritual place. And also that we're deeply connected. I mean, we came from the forests, and it's this place that is not only physically but mentally healthy to be in. So yeah, so I'm just checking up on the time here. I won't be too much longer. Yeah, so these are, I think there's only 2 more, yeah. So these are also from the forest, and showcase more of like the nighttime side, where I'm really trying to highlight the forms of the trees and kind of all aspects, not just like the serene and beautiful side, but kind of, yeah, trying to get a more wholesome view of at least my experience of the forest. Yeah, so the last thing about these ones and the organic forms, when the highlights are completely blown out in places, that you're allowing, you're kind of surrendering the work to be involved, or to have the nature to have an impact, have an involvement, and dictate how the final image turns out. So like these forms were totally dictated by like the water movement and the different plant mats that are added, and you're giving it kind of like pockets of blank space to do its work. But yeah, that's my project. So I try to keep that as concise as possible. Sorry if I got too technical there. But yeah, in essence, yeah. Okay, cool.
I really understand what you meant about like the idea of kind of creating more layers within the work, and I think it's really interesting to see your use of flash, and then the turning of it kind of almost makes it look like a trompe l'oeil effect, or that it's kind of like cutouts on top of it. Yeah, we'll have some interesting discussion about it at the end, but for now I will hand over to our last speaker, which is Amina, if you're ready to go.
I am, yes. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to give a really quick overview to me and who I am and what I do. But I want to talk a bit about the project and the workshop that I did for LAPC and the Photo Fringe, which Bryony showed us earlier in the exhibition, the Digital Journeys zine. So apologies if I start speaking a bit too quick, because I know we don't have much time, but let me know, I'll slow down. So, all right, please, let's go. So I am a portrait and documentary photographer. That's kind of what I'm calling myself these days. I'm still kind of not really sure about that. So, but yeah, that's kind of what I call myself at the moment. So I am normally a freelance photographer. That's kind of been paused a little bit recently due to the whole global pandemic, unfortunately, like many other people, I think. And at the moment, I'm kind of not really practicing freelance very much, but I am still kind of carrying photography on a personal basis, kind of now focusing on personal projects, which is actually quite nice to have that time to do that again. And aside from that, I'm kind of, what I'm doing is making a move into other places where I can try and make some money and try to earn a living, now that I can't do that with photography as much. So I mean, I'm kind of doing that with writing, and I'm kind of moving into social media if anyone is kind of interested on that side of things. I have written a bit more about that in my newsletter, Notes on Freelancing, that Hannah mentioned earlier. And that's all on my website. If anyone's interested, you can go straight through to there and have a look. But yeah, so I'm going to go kind of over a couple of my main projects with you guys. The slideshow is actually going a bit quicker than I thought it would, but hopefully you guys will kind of see which bits I'm talking about anyway. So the first kind of project I wanted to mention was my project El Camino, which is it's a kind of very simplistic documentary series. Actually, you know what, let me just go back to the pictures, otherwise I think we'll get a bit lost. So this is from El Camino, which is a simplistic documentary series that I photographed while I was trekking along the Camino de Santiago. If no one knows what it is, it's a kind of pilgrimage. It's quite a famous pilgrimage in Spain. So there's not technically one route. There's quite, I'm not actually sure how many there are. There's, I think, 7 or 8 different routes at least, which kind of all converge in the northwestern city of Santiago de Compostela in the Galicia region of Spain. And all these kind of pilgrimages all go to this one area, and that's, the pilgrimage is kind of, it starts wherever you want it to, basically. But these pictures are from the kind of most popular one, which starts in the south of France. And from the start point in France, I think it's about 800 kilometers walking or cycling, or you can also do it by horse. And I've seen a couple of people with donkeys do it as well, which is quite funny when you come across them. They're very cute though. And I decided to do this walk in 2016. So partly because I'm half Spanish, my mum's from the region, Galicia. I thought it would be quite an interesting way to kind of explore that heritage, while also doing this really long distance walk, which I just kind of really enjoyed the sound of. And oh, I thought I had one more picture. Okay, don't worry about that. So yeah, okay, so let's go to the next bits. This is actually from a recent project that I did during lockdown. So while we were locked down, I kind of, obviously we couldn't really go out as very much, but to kind of keep photographing, I was just kind of photographing moments around the house, around the garden, especially because I'm living with my mum at home and she's high risk, so I couldn't really go out as much as I wanted to, even for kind of daily walks. I was trying to just stay inside really. So the garden became quite a kind of place of calm and peace, and my only source of sunshine and fresh air. But it was quite interesting in the end to see all the photographs I put together, to see this kind of place that I've lived here for 29 years. It's a very familiar place. For me, it's kind of, when I think about it being kind of well worn, but actually there were all these kind of moments happening that were very new and unfamiliar and a bit magical, like this day it was quite early on, I think in March, where this magpie flew onto our house and got stuck, and my mum had to kind of rescue it and set it free again. So that's this picture. And a recent project that I put together also during lockdown, I'm just going to play through these now. So this was, I live in Croydon in South London. For those of you that don't know, it's got quite a bad reputation. Normally if someone has heard of Croydon and they don't live there, they'll kind of look at you and go, oh my God, you're from Croydon. No, I don't want to speak to you anymore. But it's actually a very nice place. And it's not deserving of the bad reputation that it has. I think like anywhere in London, like any of the boroughs, any of the towns, it's got its good and bad sides. But for some reason, a lot of the good side gets lost. So over lockdown, I kind of put together this archive I realised I had of all these hundreds of pictures of Croydon that I've taken through, like, from my time living here, commuting to work, from work, just walking around. I put these together and it was published in a book, in a little zine, which you saw just a few slides ago, which amazingly recently sold out, which I was quite surprised about. I was very happy about it, and potentially doing a rerun if anyone is interested. Let's see what's next. Sorry, and I'm kind of rushing through these a bit. I want to get to the good stuff. Right, skip to the next one. So just another project I wanted to mention quite quickly. This is, oh, I think I've paused it now. Let's do that again. This is 8 limbs. So this is, it's quite a different project. It's something I'm kind of, a topic I'm kind of exploring a bit more, and it's basically about martial arts. So I went to Thailand back in 2018 for a month. I lived there for a month, and I lived at a Muay Thai school for a month. And Muay Thai, which is it's the art of Thai boxing. It's the kind of national martial art of Thailand, and I was quite interested in exploring it, as I'm quite interested in martial arts personally, and it's something I've done a few times now. This is kind of the most recent series that came out of that, and this was kind of meant. It didn't go as planned. It was supposed to be, I was really interested in looking into kind of women in martial arts, and that didn't quite go to plan, unfortunately, for quite a few different reasons, but got quite a nice project out of it, and it's good. It's kind of acting as a basis for me to kind of carry on now. And this is a different project, but on a very similar kind of line of topic. So this was my university final year project. This was, I guess, kind of the first kind of project that I started exploring the landscape in, not kind of explicitly, but the land kind of started making its way into my work without me really realizing. And this was kind of, I guess, the trigger project for everything that I do now. And this was about Kung Fu. So I went to China for a month. You can see the theme here. And I spent a month living in a school of Kung Fu, which was amazing and totally random and completely crazy and so different from anything I've ever done. And yeah, so this was the beginning of it all. And yeah, so just see if I've got another few pictures. Okay, yeah, so that's the end of that project that I wanted to mention quickly. Outside of all those kind of documentary style projects, I also do portraiture. I know it's not really got anything to do with sustainability or digital sustainability that I want to talk to you about in a minute, but I thought I'd just go through this quite quickly. This workshop, when Bryony approached me for this workshop, I wasn't really sure if I was the right person at first. I think Bryony, I told you that. And just because, like, looking back through all my work and the kind of things that I've done so far, while I've kind of always had an interest in sustainability and sustainable practices, it's not really something that I have had a chance to kind of explore more fully through my work. So up until that moment, this is kind of me. So I was kind of thinking about what I could kind of put forward for the workshop, what I could really kind of do to be relevant to the topic of sustainability and sustainable practices in photography, apart from the kind of the usual kind of trying to think about my own kind of individual practices, what I do to kind of be more sustainable as a photographer, as a creative, as a person generally. But I kind of wanted to go a bit more deeper than that, past all this kind of the usual stuff. And that's kind of where I began thinking about how, even though I shoot film sometimes, so kind of a lot of these portraits were shot on film, and I was interested in the idea of exploring that kind of physical side of things, and maybe being a bit experimental. Being a bit more experimental with things, like Matt and Nettie was speaking about. I was quite interested in maybe experimenting with that, but I didn't want to kind of just use this as a way to experiment. I wanted to kind of go a bit deeper into what I'm doing already. So basically I'm not really sure what triggered it still, but kind of I suddenly had this idea, when just kind of a bit of a random thought about digital sustainability and how our kind of digital lives and like the digital world we live in is, how does that relate in terms of sustainability and eco practices and green practices. And it was so I did some research into it, and I thought maybe because the workshop, as Bryony mentioned earlier, we decided to do a walk. So we just went in a group to, what's it called? Well, we did the South Downs Way. We did part of the South Downs Way towards the Seven Sisters and came back again. And that was kind of the physical aspect of the workshop. And I was kind of interested in looking at the idea of our digital carbon footprint. And I tried to keep it simple. I didn't want to make it too conceptual and a bit too woo-woo sounding. But in the end, we kind of looked at the idea of the digital carbon footprint. And actually, a couple of things I wanted to mention was in my research for the workshop, I found out some things which were quite interesting, quite shocking. And so I'm just going to read out this thing here. So one of the big points for me that I read was that in the last 2 years, our global digital lives have actually overtaken the aviation industry in terms of contributing to carbon emissions, which I was just like, what? Why is no one speaking about this? Like, I've never heard of this anywhere, especially in the last kind of couple of years. I think as I have been traveling, I had been traveling a lot. I was kind of conscious of the fact that the aviation industry does contribute a lot. But then when I read this about our digital carbon footprint being more than it now, I was like, oh, Jesus, okay, got to kind of reevaluate some things here. And this, so when we kind of, I know it's a bit random when we think digital sustainability, you're probably thinking like, what does that really mean? What are you talking about? What are you on about? So basically, to put it in kind of terms we all kind of can understand properly, is that like every action we take online, even the smallest ones, like liking a tweet or putting an image on Instagram, every one of these, like sending an email, every one of these kind of little actions has a real world emission. So when you kind of think about it, everything online is hosted somewhere offline. In the real world, there are servers, countless thousands, millions of servers around the world that are using up energy and emitting emissions, you know what I mean. And it's all kind of having an effect, even though we're kind of being sold the idea of the cloud, which sounds very light and very peaceful and very green, but it's not. And everything we kind of do has an effect and uses up energy. So this kind of not realization, but kind of realizing that the idea of the digital carbon footprint, that's what I was trying to say, I kind of wanted to bring that into the workshop, and also a bit more generally think about like our digital lives and how that affects us in various different ways. So I'm just going to open the zine. Actually, you know what? I think I've got it open already. There's quite a few images on here, and I wanted to leave them to load. Okay, so this is the digital zine. So I'll explain a little bit about the digital zine idea as well, actually, before I go into it. So the workshop itself, there was 5 of us in total, I think. We ended up walking together, taking photographs. There wasn't any kind of main theme in terms of the photographs, but the workshop was more about kind of exploring the idea, in which we kind of discussed a lot on the way. I kind of got into speaking about digital carbon footprint, social media, data privacy, how our phones track us, the whole kind of Facebook and Instagram tracking us at every turn kind of thing, and Google as well, specifically Google Maps. So on the day, I spoke a little bit about how Google Maps can track us, and actually I should have made this into a little exercise, but basically if you use Google Maps regularly, and if you have your location history turned on, which when you download the app first, or if you get a phone that already has Google Maps on it, it will be on by default normally, unless you've switched it off. That's how they get you. but basically you can look into Google Maps and you can see everywhere you've been ever. Like, since that location history was turned on, you see like where you've been at certain times of the day, how long you've stopped at places, if you've been to cafes, if you've taken photographs, it will tell you, you took this photograph here at this time, and here's the photograph as well. So if you do go into Google Maps and have a look, and you find that your location history is turned off, don't turn it on. Just find someone who's already got it on and have a look, but don't turn it on. It's not worth it. So yeah, so this was a little part of the workshop, was this tracking aspect, because, which is what I did that myself. So Google already owns my soul, unfortunately, because since I bought a Google phone, it's probably not a good idea, but it's too late for me. And yeah, so that was kind of one aspect that we spoke about. And we also spoke about social media and that kind of aspect, and in terms of how much we use social media, which also has like a real world effect. So every time you use social media, it has a real life emission. But also the other side of things as well, is it kind of sustainable in terms of, for us, is it kind of how can we change the way we use social media so that it's sustainable for us as humans, so that we kind of don't start losing our minds from using social media, which is just happening very easily, unfortunately. And if any of you have watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, haven't watched it, sorry, I highly recommend watching it, because it's very revealing, and it's very eye-opening for that kind of that topic. Yeah, a couple of other things I'll mention quickly before I just take you through the scene. Got about 9 minutes left. Good, on track. So yeah, so another kind of aspect that we can kind of think about, that we spoke about during the workshop as photographers, like what we can do ourselves. It was quite interesting to kind of go through it, because there was things that we didn't kind of realise or think about until someone else had said it. So while I was researching as well, I found this agency called Land Arts Agency. So I'll send these links at the end of my talk. I'll put these into the group so that you can see them, into the message box, sorry. But Land Art Agency they're kind of a new agency all around the idea of sustainable photography, sustainable practices. And they've written up a green manifesto, which is really, really good to read. And they kind of, when I was reading it for the first time, it was just kind of interesting to come across things like thinking about, if you have a website, is your kind of website host green? Are they eco? Do they have an ecosystem in place? And kind of even small things like that. And the domain name provider, are they eco as well? Because that also takes up energy on their side through also servers. And going kind of even further was the idea of the digital zine. So instead of doing something physical, I thought we could just do it digitally as a way to be kind of sustainable and not use up any physical items. And I always think it still sounds a bit silly, but hopefully not. But I kind of started thinking about the idea of like recycling digitally, like how could we do that as well? And that's when I kind of thought about, so Of the Land and Us, which is my is an existing platform, and so I decided that we could put the zine on there, because then that's sort of, it's already on there, it's already existing, all these kind of, this platform is already here and done, so we don't actually have to contribute anything new, any other energy usage to the existing ones. So that was kind of my idea of reusing, sorry, not recycling, and then recycling towards the end of the exhibition, when this kind of all closes down. The project will then go into an archive, which will still be online. But that was maybe a bit too woo-woo, but that was kind of the ideas I had around the workshop. And yeah, so I'm just going to quickly take you through the zine itself. just to show you what it looks like. But I'll link to this in the, I'll send this link along as well at the end, and you guys can have a proper look for yourselves. It was quite, it was really fun to put together, actually, because I always think like, oh, digital might not be as good as doing it physically, but actually it was quite interesting to play around with the different kind of things that doing it digitally gives you over doing it physically. And the fact that this can be seen around the world now very easily, which is great. I didn't really prepare anything to say while I was showing this, but I thought you guys would just like to have a look. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much everything I wanted to say about this. But yeah, it was quite interesting for me anyway to approach the idea of sustainability in this way, and I'm not sure how. I mean, I think it's good to kind of, I'll be doing a bit more research into this now and playing around with a few ideas, because I think this is quite an interesting kind of way to think about it. And in any case, the kind of thoughts that we had while on the workshop that we've started to kind of put into play. So I think Ed Bryden, who was the second artist on here on the zine, has already kind of been checking up on his own kind of digital emissions. So he's been checking his own website to see who if they're hosted with someone who's eco, which I thought was quite good. That there's a website that allows you to check kind of websites that you use, the hosts and the domain providers and all the kind of little surrounding bits like that, if they're all eco, which is a good way to start, I think, at least, and hopefully kind of build more into that. And the kind of idea I'd really like to progress with next is kind of this idea of social media and how we can kind of build that into a more sustainable platform for ourselves, in terms of the emission side of things, and also make it sustainable for us, because at the moment it's not sustainable. And I already said, like, this Netflix documentary, The Social Dilemma, it's just so eye-opening when you watch it. There's so much stuff in there that's really, really interesting, especially as creatives as well. For most of us who use social media, or have to use social media, or feel like we have to use it, I think it's been a really, really important watch if you guys get a chance to see it. I think I'll end it there, otherwise I'm probably taking up too much time. Too many ideas in one go.
Thank you. Yes, really interesting point, I think, for everyone to think about. And it's also just really wonderful to hear that, you know, this wasn't something that you'd thought about before in your practice, and actually us kind of proposing this to you has kind of spurred you on to do all of this research into something which you didn't consider before, and then kind of passing that knowledge on to obviously everyone today, and then the people that did your workshop. Maybe we can write in the chat the kind of the links that you were talking about for how to check, you know, how friendly your website provider is and stuff. That would be great. And also, someone's asked for the title of the next film.
Yeah.
So just
I'll type it in now. I'll send it to you guys, sorry.
So I'm just going to read out a few questions from everyone before we get kicked out. The exhibition closes at 5, so Bryony and I might have to abruptly kind of end the talk at 5 when we get kicked out of the gallery space, but hopefully we've got a bit of time for questions. So first off, at the beginning, someone I think was asking for Nettie's Instagram handle. So I will write that also in the chat for everyone. Or maybe that was for you at the tour at the beginning.
Oh yeah, yes. Eileen, thank you. Put ours in there, but we can put everyone's in there at the end.
Would anyone know of any anther type workshops, please? So workshops, you can always check the LAPC Instagram and website, and we'll always put ours on there. We also promote the ones which are done through Land Art Agency, because both Melanie and myself and Anna are all represented by Land Art Agency. So we sometimes run workshops through them. So I would recommend following the social media for LAPC and for Land Art Agency. We've got some questions for Nettie that first off. Are you there, Nettie?
Yeah.
Someone's asking, you talked about your work being seasonal. So do you work in the summer with this process, or have you ever had success in the winter months?
Yeah, it just takes longer. I mean, I've worked in Sweden through the early spring where there was very little light. It just takes a long time. So again, that's another thing you have to consider. Maybe you reevaluate the way you work. You know, there's summer work and there's winter work. But yeah, you just leave them out for a lot longer.
Cool. And someone else has asked you if you've ever practiced permaculture in your garden or your allotment.
No, but I'm actually setting the seeds for that for next year. That's something that I'm really interested in.
Cool. So we can keep an eye out for where you're
yeah.
garden adventures. So has anyone else got any final questions? Oh, we had a note from Eileen about the fixer that she tried using. So she has been using a mixture of urine and salt. So to make this kind of natural fixative, you would basically dissolve as much salt as possible into either the urine or the water solution. And what you're just looking for is a really, really high saline solution. And the salt works in a different way to commercial fixer does. Commercial fixer is physically like removing your silver halides from your silver gelatin paper if they haven't been developed, whereas a salt-based fix actually denatures the silver halides, so it takes much longer than a commercial fixer because it's kind of doing this different process, a different action. So that's why when you're working with a salt-based fixer, you actually need to leave it in there for like 24 hours for that denaturing to occur across the whole print. If anyone else hasn't got any other questions, I've got some for Matt. I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit. You talked about the kind of dyeing process that you use to dye the prints that you make being like an eco dye, and I was just wondering if that was similar to kind of like eco bundle dyeing that you would do on fabric, or if it was something a bit different.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, exactly, Hannah. It was like kind of that's what I was looking up, and then I thought, I could actually use this in a print, but instead of wrapping, I wrapped a few prints where you could actually get the outlines and the almost like photographs of the leaves and everything on it. But I decided to rather do it in a big kettle and use. But yeah, I did end up using, because in that process, I was using branches as like the base, and then wrapping the print around, and then the string. And then I ended up still keeping all the branches and stuff to get all the scratches. But yeah, it's essentially the same thing with a matte inkjet or pigment print.
Okay, I guess you just have to be quite a lot more like delicate paper compared to if you're using fabric?
Yeah, exactly. Because that's where that's where you kind of pick and choose when you're layering. Because like I'd put a print, and then depending on what I found there, I could kind of like add in like a couple branches from that tree and then prints, and then if I found flowers, I'd then add flowers too. So you can kind of independently turn them all in one kettle. And the movement of the water while boiling would kind of create things as well. But yeah, it does become very delicate. And when you leave it in a lot longer, you get like that last image where it becomes almost completely abstract and kind of misty. And yeah, but essentially it's very similar to the eco-toning or the eco-dyeing that people do in the materials.
And is this kind of something you've worked with previously in practice, or is it new for this project?
Yeah, it's new for this project. I was doing a lot of lumen prints, which I'd leave there for like 1 to 2 months, and then I wanted to incorporate the debris and like the nature or the environment more. So I started experimenting, and then you're doing those other prints with the sticks and stuff just to kind of test out this toning, and eventually it kind of just all kind of worked together, and this was like it made sense to make like merging together multiple processes that I've been experimenting with into one cohesive body, where it kind of all made sense visually for me and also conceptually.
And have you tried it with like analog fiber-based paper as well, or just with digital printing?
Yeah, I've tried it with some fiber darkroom paper, but it was also just like a cost thing, because I went through at a time I didn't have access to the darkroom, and then I had this printer which I was planning to use for other things, and then I was just like, well, you know what, I've got this paper, I've got this print, and then it was like all this experimenting, and then but yeah, essentially I think that would be the best route forward, would probably be like some proper darkroom paper that I could then enlarge, and then because then you can actually add in a whole bunch of different techniques like solarization and stuff, which would be very interesting.
Yeah,
something to look into.
Yeah, thanks. So just quickly before we kind of finish up, a few people are asking Nettie about kind of how you approach people to get residencies. And I think that's a really interesting point. Like often you feel like, you know, you can only do a residency if it's an open call or if someone's already looking, you know, for an artist in residency. But actually it might be the case that, especially if it's an outdoor space like a garden, you know, they just haven't considered having an artist in residence before. And you kind of need to make that initial step, that initial kind of point of contact. So Nettie, did you want to say anything at all about kind of how you made that point of contact, or how you would go about approaching these?
I just emailed, because the Painswick Rococo Garden, it's a trust, it's not a National Trust property, it's just it's one particular place that's run by a trust fund. So I just approached them and said, could I come and be artist in residence and come here 1 day a week and work here? And they were up for it. But you see, I mean, you could be artist in residence in a bus stop. There's nothing to stop you from making yourself artist in residence anywhere you want to be. So I say to people, just take up residence somewhere. You know, it's about reclaiming our space. You can do it. You just have to decide where you want to work and why. And so what my advice would be, just go out there and populate the land and be an artist in residence in a graveyard or a church porch. I don't know, anywhere. This is how I do it a lot of the time.
Yeah, exactly. Lots of artists do kind of like self-initiated artist residencies. So it could even be your local park, and you could just say, yeah, I'm artist in residence here, I'm initiating it. It doesn't have to have all this kind of stigma or invitation around it. It can be...
No, it's about commitment. I mean, you could say that my Basket of Souls project was a residency. I committed to going there every single day. And I thought a lot about what I was doing, and I documented it. It was a process of work. I was very rigorous about it. It's a residency. You know, you could say going and staying with a friend in another part of the country, can't do much of that, is a residency. It's how you formulate it. I think it's the way you approach it. I approached it, I had a plan, I had a schedule, and I stuck to it. So I think that's the important thing, to do it with intention.
Yeah, brilliant.
It's a great idea. Get out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, get out there.
You can. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. It was quite a varied mix of practices this evening, but it was really nice to see how like the landscape can bring people together in such different ways and produce such an array of work. And it was a real treat to be able to do it from Brighton today. I really look forward to exploring some more of the Photo Fringe. If you haven't already had a chance to come down and see it, it's on show until the 2nd of November. So I really recommend having a little day trip, treating yourself, seeing some nice photography. And I'll leave it at that. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Hannah. Thank you, Brian.
Cool.
Really,
Thank you.
thanks a lot.